Welcome to Module 2. In the previous module, we spoke about the pain points of code review and how automation with n8n can step in to help. Now it's time for us to get more hands-on. In this module, I'll show you how to connect Azure DevOps with n8n. So what are we building in this module? First, we will configure a webhook node in n8n to receive JSON payloads from Azure DevOps. Second, we will configure a service hook in Azure DevOps using the newly created webhook URL. Third, we will configure a set node in n8n to extract pull request metadata. Finally, we will perform an end-to-end testing to validate this integration. Now that we know what we are about to build, let's jump to n8n and see how we can start building our automation. I am currently logged into my instance of n8n. If you haven't tried n8n before, go ahead and sign up for the free 14-day trial so you can build along with me. With the free trial, n8n offers up to 200 executions per day, which is perfect for building and testing your automation workflows. Before I dive into creating the workflow, I want to quickly talk about how n8n organizes your work. In n8n, your work is organized into projects, and each project contains one or more workflows, which are your actual automations. Let's go ahead and create our first workflow. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on this Create Workflow button. n8n takes us to this workflow canvas where you'll see a couple of options. So at the top, you'll see three tabs. The first one is the Editor tab, and you'll be spending most of your time in the Editor tab when you're building your workflow. The second one is the Executions tab. So anytime your workflow gets executed, this Execution tab is going to keep a history of your executions, and it will also show you the input and output data of each node. The other button that you need to be aware of is the Save button. So anytime you make changes to your workflow, you're required to hit Save so that n8n can save the changes. I'll talk about this active inactive option once we build this workflow. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a webhook. To add a webhook, I'm going to click on this plus icon, and I'm going to search for webhook. So before I add a webhook, I just want to briefly talk about what a webhook is. Think of this webhook like a doorbell to your automation. When someone pushes the code and opens a pull request in Azure DevOps, we want to notify our n8n workflow so that it can trigger automatically. This webhook is how Azure DevOps rings the bell and says, hey, a new PR is here, start reviewing it. So let's just click on the webhook here, and this is the user interface that you'll see here. So let's start looking at the properties of the webhook. The first property is the webhook URL property. n8n gives you two URLs. The first one is the test URL, and the second one is the production URL. So for the initial phase of this automation, I'll be using the test URL, and at a later stage, I'll switch to production URL. The second property that you see here is the HTTP method. By default, it is GET, but we need to select POST. The reason why we are selecting POST is we want the pull request data from Azure DevOps to flow into our workflow. And that's the reason why we are selecting POST. The third property is called path, which is simply the endpoint name. By default, n8n provides a GUID, but let's change it to a more meaningful name. So I'm going to put in code review. As I put in the path, you can notice that the URL takes the path into consideration. So that's the reason why we had to give some meaningful name. So it's easy for us to use this URL when we set up the service hook in Azure DevOps. The next property is the authentication property. For now, I'm going to leave it as none. What this means is anyone with this link can send data. For testing purpose, setting it to none is fine, but for production, I recommend you secure this with a secret token. The last property is called respond, and I'm going to leave the value to the default, which is immediately. What this means is n8n will instantly confirm receipt of the webhook, even if the rest of the workflow is still processing. That's important because some systems expect a quick response, otherwise they'll think that the webhook failed. And that's it. Now we have a webhook which is ready to listen for pull request events. Before I dive into Azure DevOps and show you how to set up a service hook, I want to quickly show you how to test a webhook using Postman. So here I have a Postman request, and this URL that you see here is what I copied over from the webhook I just created. So this is the test URL that we saw in the webhook step. And in the body, I have a sample payload. It doesn't matter. It can be anything. You can just put whatever property you want, and you can provide any value that you want. The payload here is not important. I just wanted to show how you can use Postman to test the webhook that we just created. So at this point, if I hit send, I'm going to get a 404, and I'm going to explain you why. So let's click on send, and you get a 404 not found. The reason why you're getting a 404 not found is I'm using the test URL here, and like I said earlier, if I use a test URL, I have to invoke the workflow manually. If I use the production URL, then I don't have to do it. Once I hit send, it will get triggered automatically. Okay, so let me show you how to do it. So let's come to n8n, click on execute workflow, and now the webhook is waiting for a trigger event. So let's go back to our Postman, and now let's hit send again. There you go. So this is proof that the webhook is running and you got a message workflow was started, and we can confirm that by going back to our n8n. So in here, if you see a green checkbox right next to in the webhook, that's an indication that this webhook was executed. The second thing that you can do is you can go to the executions tab, and you will see that the webhook succeeded. All right, now that we have tested our webhook, let's move on to Azure DevOps. In this step, I'm going to show you how to create a service hook to connect to n8n. So I'm in my instance of Azure DevOps, and I'm not going to go in depth on how to create a project or how to set up a repo in Azure DevOps, because the focus here is on how to integrate Azure DevOps with n8n. So just to give you a brief overview, the way the work is structured in Azure DevOps is you'll have an organization. Within an organization, you can have one or more projects, and within each project, you can have one or more repos. So in the screen, you can see that I have a repo called Code Review Automation, and I have like 3 files in here. I have like 2 SQL files, and I have a C# controller here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Project Settings, and I'm going to click on Service Hooks. A service hook in Azure DevOps is like a messenger. It listens for events inside the repo, such as when someone creates a pull request, and then immediately sends that information out to an external service, which in our case is the webhook that we just built in n8n. So the idea here is simple. Whenever a new pull request is created in this repo, Azure DevOps will fire off a message to our webhook, which in turn will trigger our workflow. This is how we connect Azure DevOps events with automation in n8n. So now, as we are in the service hook page, let's just click on this plus icon to create a new subscription. And in this list of services, I'm going to select webhook. and click Next. And here in the list of triggers that we have, because our use case is tied to creating a new pull request, I'm going to scroll down and select pull request created event. And here you can select the name of your repository. So I'm going to select code review automation. And for the other properties, I'm just going to leave it the default values and click Next. In here, we need to put in the name of your webhook URL. So I'm going to go back to n8n, click on webhook, and just click on the URL once to copy the URL. So once you copy the URL, we'll come back to Azure DevOps and we'll paste the URL in here. Now that's it. We just have finished setting up the webhook. The service hook, and let's click Finish. So it has added the webhook at this point. So what I can do is, without going into Azure DevOps to create a new pull request, I can simulate that behavior from here. So I'm just going to click on the new webhook URL that the service hook that we just added. Go to Edit, click Next, and you see this test setup. If you hit test now, it's going to fail because, like I said earlier, we are using the test URL, and for us to invoke a test URL, you have to first invoke the workflow manually. So let's go to n8n and let's click on Execute Workflow. So now that we have manually invoked the workflow, let's go back to the service hook and let's hit the test button. Okay, so the request succeeded here, and let's go back to n8n and see what's going on here. So I'm going to click Executions, and now you see that the test that we performed from Azure DevOps has triggered this webhook, which in turn triggered the workflow, and that's what you see here. As of now, we saw how to create a webhook node in n8n and how to set the properties. Second, we saw how to set up a service hook in Azure DevOps to connect to n8n. So by doing these two steps, we have established a handshake between Azure DevOps and n8n. Now the next step for us is to add a set node in n8n to extract pull request metadata. So why do we need to perform this step? So when you send a pull request from Azure DevOps, it's going to send you a lot of properties. And we are not interested in all the properties, and we just need a handful of properties to execute the future workflows. So for that, I'm going to just click on this plus icon, and I'm going to search for set. And you will see something called as edit fields. So this is a node that n8n offers to extract some key metadata information. So let's just select that. And what you'll see here is an option to either do manual mapping or JSON. So I'm just going to select manual mapping, and I'm going to add some fields that I need to pass on to my future workflows. So the first thing I'm going to add is a pull request ID field. And for the values are already in here. So I'm just going to look for the body tag. Yeah. And within the body, I have a resource property. So I'm just going to look for that. Yep. So I have the resource property. And within that, I'll have a property called pull request ID. So you can just select this, drag and drop into this value field, and it's going to take that entire tree view hierarchy that we just saw. Similarly, I'm just going to add a couple of fields. So I'm just going to add the title. And again, the title property should be available here. So I'm just going to drag and drop that in here. Sorry, let me do it one more time. Drag and drop. And you'll immediately see the value here. And I'm just going to continue doing it to put some additional fields here. Okay. For description, for now, I'm just going to put some dummy value here. And the next field I'm going to add is the source branch. going to call it source branch, and you should see it here. So let's just drag and drop the source ref name value. The next field I'm going to add is called the target branch. And I'm going to drag and drop the target ref name. The next field I'm going to add is called the repo ID. Repo ID. And the repo ID value is inside the repository. So it's in here. And I'm going to just drag and drop the value. These values will be used in the future workflow. So that's the reason why I'm adding it now. And I just have to add 2 more fields. So the next field I'm going to add is called project name. And inside repository, expand the project, and you can add that in here. The last property I'm going to add is the organization name. The reason why I'm adding organization name is in the future workflows, you're going to make calls to the Azure DevOps API endpoints. And during that step, you'll need the name of the organization that you just created in Azure DevOps. So my organization name is called BG Learn Azure. So I'm just adding it here, and that's it. So I've added all these fields now. So all I had to do is just click save. And if at any given point of time, if you want to delete any of your node, all you have to do is just go in here and click the delete button to delete it. So before I kick off this workflow, I just want to change the name. So instead of edit fields, I want this node to be called get PR metadata. You can name it anything you want, but just name something that's more meaningful. Okay, so before I move on to the next module, I just want to perform an end-to-end testing of what we just created. So this is what we're going to do. First, we are going to create a pull request in Azure DevOps. Second, we're going to see our workflow get executed, and we're going to monitor that execution. And then we're going to open the last step that we added, which is the set node, and we are going to verify the payload structure. Okay, now it's time for us to do the end-to-end testing to verify if the pull request that gets created in Azure DevOps triggers a workflow. So I'm in Azure DevOps, I'm inside my repo, and I'm going to click on new pull request. So I'm just going to give a name. I'm just going to call my first, you can put in any name, any title you want. This is my first time testing this workflow, so I just put something related to that. And in here, like I said earlier, I'm using the test URL, so I have to invoke the workflow first before I create the pull request. So let me go in here, click on execute workflow, and I'm going to go back to my pull request and hit create. And I'm going to navigate back to n8n, and you'll start seeing this triggered. You just saw it triggered. So you see the 2 checkboxes, which shows that it was triggered. So I'm going to click on executions and click on the latest execution. And if I just double click on the last node that I added, you will see the output in here. So you see in here a webhook step pulled in all this pull request data, but we are interested only in a handful of properties, and that's what we did with the set node step. So we are extracting only the pull request ID, title, description, source branch, target branch, repo ID, project name, and organization. This will come in handy when we do our future flow steps. So there you have it. So in this video, what we watched was we created a webhook node. We set up a service hook in Azure DevOps to establish a handshake between Azure DevOps and n8n. And finally, we added a set node in n8n to pull request metadata. Thanks for watching this module. In the next module, I'll show you how to add some nodes that can make calls to the Azure DevOps endpoint to get more information about pull request. Thanks for watching.